I'm not sure I can ever forgive Pokémon Sun and Moon. Mainline Pokémon games have always been enjoyable, feel-good fun. Even at their most generic, the general formula of a Pokémon game works well for me. By the same token, I also wouldn't call many Pokémon games revelatory. They don't stir in me a flurry of emotion or inspire me on the day-to-day. Rarely am I telling people that a Pokémon game is absolutely mandatory playing. To that end, the most enjoyable part of Pokémon, the Pokémon themselves, remain fun in an independent kind of way, divorced from the games through my own imagination or seeing them rendered by someone else through fan work. This sounds obvious to an extent, but there is something unusual about it. When we say we like a certain character or a specific gameplay mechanic, we typically like these things with respect to at least an aspect of a story or a game they appear in. But the same doesn't seem to be true of Pokémon. When I say I like Flygon, for example, I'm saying nothing about games like Ruby, Sapphire, or Emerald, the generation in which Flygon first appeared. I am literally only indicating a preference for Flygon, all on its lonesome. The same is true of all my favorite Pokémon. It's for this reason that it's easy to imagine huge swaths of Pokémon fans who either know nothing about the games or actively dislike them. It's very possible this is the majority. Either way, the point remains the same. There's something inessential about the video games, even by those who enjoy them. So why does Pokémon often fail to excite? Here's a potential candidate: perspective. Or maybe the lack thereof. Pokémon games are often frustratingly anemic, failing to capture any relevant points of view or ideas about the world. Sometimes you'll be lucky if the games can even manage something coherent, much less insightful. In my Explorers of Sky video, I mentioned there was something novel about this sunset scene, something more intimate than what we've come to expect in the context of a Pokémon game. This intimacy became more pronounced in its sequel game, Gates to Infinity. In hindsight, the reason why these scenes are unusual is so obvious I can't believe it took me until now to catch on to it. None of them feature the player character. This shifts the incentives of what the scenes can be about in a pretty significant way. Scenes like this will be disinclined to talk about critical, plot-relevant stuff because anything said here will need to be repeated once the player re-enters the picture. They will, however, be more inclined to talk about personal viewpoints and opinions, things specific to the characters in the scene that don't necessarily need to be brought up again in the lead's presence. These scenes are forced to be more intimate exactly because we are pulling away from the player character. Now think about this. Think about how rarely we leave the player character's point of view in a mainline Pokémon. It's virtually never, give or take an intro cutscene. Perhaps an innocuous thing by most metrics, but I wonder if it communicates to us something else. A subtle way in which the mainline games suggest to us that other perspectives are not all that interesting or worthy of attending to. Whatever is being promised to us at the beginning of the game, whatever we bring to the table already, is enough. There will be nothing to challenge or alter our opinion over our journey. Not really. Which brings me back to Sun and Moon. These ones aren't quite the same to me. These games make me feel in a way no other mainline Pokémon has before or since. A Pokémon game that got me playing, amongst all the usual reasons, for its story as well. Games so inspiring, they successfully tricked me into thinking this was the new bar of quality for the series. I've been a glutton for punishment ever since. Nevertheless, I would absolutely call Sun and Moon essential playing. Sun and Moon were initially positioned as a sort of shake-up to the Pokémon formula. This generation wasn't going to be about tackling gyms, it was going to be about tackling island trials and totem Pokémon and kahunas. Add on top of that the removal of HMs with ride Pokémon, the introduction of regional forms, and whatever the heck Z moves were, it seemed like Generation 7 was really throwing out the rulebook. In hindsight, much of this reinvention talk was more hype than bite. Sun and Moon really aren't that much different than what came before. The Island Challenge is fairly analogous to the League, the trials similar to gyms, and most obvious changes are better described as quality of life improvements than they are new, convention-breaking paradigms. There are still evil teams, legendary Pokémon to catch, a league to face at the end of the challenge, and like previous Pokémon games, they don't quite manage to shake themselves away from the player character's point of view. But that's okay. Sun and Moon may not be as radical as the trailers made them seem, but in the 2 generations that have followed their release, I've come to see that they still innovated in exactly the way I wanted, albeit in an appreciably smaller quantity. They managed to do what I had previously thought impossible for the series, give us a glimpse into a new perspective. Sun and Moon are a phenomenal junior effort for Pokémon in 3D. In particular, the region of Alola is the first one to feel earnestly 3D. A lot of this comes down to the removal of the grid-based movement and design. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire had free movement, but it was still at the end of the day a recreation of Hoenn, so the tile framework of the region remained intact. It's especially distracting when entering caves. Meanwhile, despite X and Y being the first mainline 3D games built from the ground up, Kalos struggled to fully embrace this new dimension. The region was clearly built off of the series' 2D principles and restricted any free movement to the less than ideal roller skates, which often proved to be more of a hindrance than a help precisely because of the tile-based design. Outside of some beauty shots, Kalos would have felt right at home on the DS. It's immediately obvious Alola has moved beyond this awkward middle stage evolution. The routes are a lot more free-flowing, the space connecting each location is generally more natural, and the games are much more unafraid to shift the camera around a place as you walk through it. Indeed, not only would I call Sun and Moon the best-looking 3D Pokémon, it might also be the best-looking Pokémon in general. The embrace of 3D, with its more nuanced capabilities, came with a cost. Alola's routes are noticeably smaller, more linear, and more claustrophobic than previous regions. Any semblance of choice along these paths almost always amounts to a pithy cul-de-sac with an item at the end. Otherwise, most routes in the game are, if not straight lines, arcs from one town to the next. It lends the island challenge to feeling more like a guided tour than an adventure or exploration of Alola. I don't have an issue with this at all, however, because I think Sun and Moon do a good job exemplifying why someone would want to go on a guided tour in the first place, so they can focus on the sights. And in this case, the sights I'm referring to are not the cities and towns of Alola, although they're well rendered in their own right. No, the sights I'm referring to are the Pokémon, and Sun and Moon have a better grasp on how to show off its roster of creatures than most other Pokémon games. Typically, depictions of Pokémon in the overworld are limited to stationary sprites that wriggle every now and then, but I think this is where the transition to 3D has really improved things. From the small scampers of Yungoos, the ravenous energy of a Tauros blocking the road, or the slow gait of a Mudsdale, 3 dimensions have allowed the Pokémon a level of specificity in size and movement that would have otherwise been impossible to realize or parse respectively given the scope of an overworld sprite. Sun and Moon take advantage of this, filling the overworld with Pokémon in a larger quantity than we've come to expect. As a result, Alola feels more lively than the regions that came before, because when a 3D Pokémon is on the screen, it tends to be more noticeable. It's worth sticking on this point for a little longer. While I certainly won't be the one to claim all Pokémon have made the transition to 3D gracefully, it has had an unprecedented increase in the number of ways we can interact with Pokémon, which is a more than worthy trade-off in my opinion. I endorse the change from HMs to ride Pokémon, not only because it's nice not to worry about HMs, but again because it's also a more specific interaction with a singular Pokémon. It's nice to fly on a Charizard, or surf on a Sharpedo, or sniff out items with a Stoutland, rather than do these things on some vague shape approximating a Pokémon. While it would be nice to be able to choose which ride Pokémon I could have these interactions with, in the way that an HM would allow for, that is an infeasibility which would force us back to vague approximations, now in 3D. I'd much prefer to have a preset list of Pokémon helping me out, so consider me fully on board with the removal of HMs, mechanically and spiritually. Elsewhere, 3D makes things like the Poké Finder possible, a series of minigames littered throughout various spots in Alola where you scan an environment with the Rotom phone and wait for just the right moment to snap Pokémon. You know, someone should really make a game out of this concept. And I will continue to be a shill for features like Pokémon Refresh, first introduced in X and Y, as a thing this series should be doing more of. It's not a hugely involved mode or anything, but it does help to flesh out each species with their own tics and traits, on top of the general quality of being adorable. I question, after this franchise has spanned so many different games and mediums, why we have yet to see a Nintendogs but Pokémon spin-off. That just seems like an obvious no-brainer. We're not done quite yet. This is where the Island Challenge comes in. If Sun and Moon are intent on making its Pokémon more expressive, then the Island Challenge is the ultimate expression of this desire. While the substance of the trials is not unlike what you'd expect to see from a gym, the presentation makes them more impactful. Gyms were typically abstracted rooms meant to symbolize the type of its gym leader. In the best case, these gyms tried to incorporate the town or city's theming into the gym's design, but this could often be tenuous. Some games were better about this than others. Sun and Moon's trial zones, by contrast, are contained within actual landmarks of Alola, requiring little, if any, abstraction. The games then use these landmarks as set pieces designed to show off one of the region's new Pokémon. And that's the real innovation of the Island Trials. It is essentially the same as the switch from HMs to Ride Pokémon. Gyms centered around Pokémon types, while Trials center around specific Pokémon of a type. Lana's trial is an extended joke about having to herd small, pathetic Wishy-Washy down to the bottom of Brooklet Hill. It is a set piece specifically meant to capitalize on Wishy-Washy's school form, demonstrating that while one alone may be weak, many together are a formidable foe. Kiawe's trial seeks to utilize Alolan Marowak to perform dances we must spot the difference between. Acerola's trial sees us following a Pikachu around an abandoned shopping mart, only to reveal an old storage closet full of Pikachu memorabilia and childhood drawings, the desperate longings of a Mimikyu for attention. Again, a scenario fit perfectly for Mimikyu as the star role. The Island Challenge is the most effective job a Pokémon game has done in endearing me to its latest additions. I cannot overstate how much more interesting this is than simply having a Pokémon debut as the ace on someone's team. Sun and Moon are consistently making a performance out of their new Pokémon, crafting situations which directly engage with the Pokémon on a conceptual or emotional level. This is usually a level of prestige reserved for mascot Pokémon and other legendaries, but Sun and Moon wisely extend the stage to however many of its roster it can. It is much easier to remember Generation 7's Pokédex, and even have a fondness for them, because I can remember exactly how and in what situation Sun and Moon uses them, rather than the blanket context of which trainer had what, something that's always going to tend to bleed together in the mind. Sun and Moon uses the Island Challenge as a glorified showcase for the new Mons, placing them above and beyond their captains. This is a more than welcome change of pace. Unfortunately, for as much as I enjoy Alola as a region and how it shows off its peoples, places, and Pokémon, I do have one demerit, a completely different region, namely Kanto. Generation 7 released the same year as the 20th anniversary of the franchise. Thus, there is a degree to which it makes sense Sun and Moon would want to indulge in the festivities and celebrate its beginnings by harkening back to Kanto in the first generation. However, 9 years removed from this context, I'm afraid the celebration has lost its luster. The frequency with which characters bring up Kanto, or make a Kantonian reference, or show me a Kantonian Pokémon, becomes tiresome after a time. Waiting in the tall grass on a new route? Big chance you're gonna run into a Gen 1 Pokémon, or one of the disproportionately many Alolan forms that take after a Gen 1 Pokémon. The same is true of any trainers you might encounter. Zubats in caves, Diglets in tunnels, literally Diglett Tunnel, Kanto this, Kanto that, Kanto, Kanto, Kanto. The games can rationalize all they want by saying the two regions share a close connection, but it doesn't change the fact that the deference to Kanto is so overpronounced it threatens to drown out the other 6 generations of material. I hope we aren't going to have to deal with this every time a Pokémon game happens to release on a major anniversary year. Sun and Moon are far more intriguing when they're engaging with the new elements offered by Alola instead of wallowing in decades-old nostalgia. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Island Trials are amongst the most memorable parts, the places where Alola and its unique Pokémon take point. Sun and Moon have a lot of good stuff going for it. They should be more confident in letting that stuff stand on its own. So far, I have shown that Generation 7 is more refinement than reinvention. By shifting emphasis on how it constructs its region and how it depicts its Pokémon, Generation 7 may very well be the best at doing Pokémon the series has ever been. But now it's time for us to turn our attention to Sun and Moon's most divisive topic, all those annoying text boxes. It's no secret that modern Pokémon games love their cutscenes. This is not a problem. What is a problem is that these cutscenes are often quite bad, obvious, unspecific, laden with cloying platitudes that say less the more you look into them. The games don't do a very good job making me want to see the characters talk more. And then there's Sun and Moon. I'm not sure what exactly they were cooking over at Game Freak Incorporated during production, but whatever it was, they need to do it again. The cutscenes here are good, like qualitatively better than usual. The composition of scenes is more interesting, characterization is more distinctive, and there's a more intentional follow-through on ideas across the narrative. There's just more subtext in general. The cutscenes in Sun and Moon are not only worth sitting down for, they might be the best part. Too many cutscenes? Not a chance. That's 70% of the reason I'm here. Sun and Moon's major topic is tradition, their weight, and their value. In the same way Alola celebrated the series' 20th anniversary with endless Kanto references, there's a counterweight in Sun and Moon intent on interrogating the past 6 generations of games. Is there longevity in the Pokémon formula as it is? Or is it more of a burden than anything else? Is it time for Pokémon to break from tradition, or at the very least augment it? There's a strange paradox within the Island Challenge. Explicitly, it is different and wholly unique. The most significant cultural establishment within Alola, an institution meant to serve as the definitive way to learn about the region and to get to know its peoples. Via the Island Challenge, we loop in the Tapus, the Kahunas, and the Z-Crystals, critical aspects of Alolan culture essentially linked to one another. At the same time, Sun and Moon place this institution along the same continuity as that of gyms and leagues. It is another variation on the same idea. Alola's Island Challenge is a proxy for Pokémon's traditional value structure by using the process of becoming a stronger trainer as a vector to tell a coming-of-age story. This is why, despite its aesthetic differences, the Island Challenge does not feel like it represents a fundamental change to the formula. Completing trials and collecting Z-Crystals is functionally serving the same purpose as collecting gym badges. That's the contradiction at play. The Island Challenge is both an identifier unique to Alola that no other Pokémon region has, while at the same time Alola is a region in which the dominant cultural fascination is participating in Pokémon's traditional value structure. Meaning, in effect, every Pokémon region has an Island Challenge. This is why building a league in Alola can be presented within the game as both a deviation to tradition as well as an affirmation of it. Sun and Moon never resolve this paradox, but it does maintain that the Island Challenge is the best way to understand Alola. In other words, the games imply that one's degree of success at the Island Challenge is roughly correlated to one's enmeshment within Alolan culture. Success is measured by how well you do traditional Pokémon activities. In other Pokémon games, this is where the analysis would stop. It is an implicit assumption of the series that it is good to want to be a trainer, and the better of a trainer you are, the more well-rounded a person you are as well. We have such a perspective present in Sun and Moon. Hau represents a traditional archetype for Pokémon, the rival, who wants to go on the Island Challenge to become the strongest trainer Alola has ever seen, stronger than that of even his grandfather. Hau finds his participation in the Island Challenge affirming and enjoyable. It is something he is good at, and it gives him direction and purpose. Hau is the ideal case for the Island Challenge, someone who is aligned with its perspective and what it offers. But then something interesting happens. Sun and Moon offer us a completely different perspective, one vastly more omnipresent than Hau's. Lily is an extremely non-traditional character for the series. Lily does not train Pokémon, or compete in Pokémon battles, or complete the Pokédex, or research Pokémon at a lab, though she does act as Kukui's temporary lab assistant, or investigate the unique regional phenomenon that allows a deeper bond with Pokémon, nor does she take on the Island Challenge alongside us and Hau. Lily does not interface with any of the typical mechanisms within the Pokémon universe in any capacity. Indeed, she explicitly remarks that she does not like battles because she can't stand Pokémon getting hurt. Lily's main motivation for most of the game is seeing Nebby to safety, and this is arguably the main character of Sun and Moon. This is revolutionary. Lily is immediately compelling in this regard because it's the series exploring a new space in how to present its characters and their growth. Because we never battle Lily in the game, so many of the tools this series uses to express character are off the table. We can't see her become a progressively stronger trainer, nor can her personality be reflected by the Pokémon she adds to her team. Lily is a character whose motivations are simply unbothered by the conventions and standards of being inside a Pokémon game. Becoming a stronger trainer is a motivation countless Pokémon characters have had. Lily's motivations are entirely unique to her. But this is strange, right? Why would a Pokémon game spend so much time on a character so totally divorced from its core features? We may get more clarity by asking a better question. Who is the villain of Sun and Moon? Social outcasts? Nope. An abusive mother? Try again. Poisonous aliens from another dimension? Definitely not. The villain of Sun and Moon is Lily's conspicuous-looking bag. A tiny bag with devastating impact. A bag which radiates anime, petrifies society, renders all inhibitions useless. Yes, Lily's bag is nothing less than the slow decay of culture itself, a villain of the highest order. Unconvinced of the sheer terror this bag carries with it? Not to worry, you'll soon see what I mean. What is Lily's bag? It's a Pokeball. It's shaped like a Pokeball, it has a pattern of an actual Pokeball printed on its front, and Lily's interactions with Nebby are a sort of metaphorical battle. We see her try to use moves with Nebby, but we all know what happens when a trainer tries to use a Pokemon that's too high a level. Nebby does not listen. Lily can't catch Nebby into her Pokeball because she is an awful trainer. By typical Pokemon logic, this simple fact ought to make Lily unworthy of attention. She may as well be one of the generic NPCs walking around the various towns. Yet this direct relationship between competency as trainer and worth is exactly what Sun and Moon are going to reject, particularly with Lily's mother. A gifted young trainer like the player, and he bothers with someone like you. How disappointing. Lusamine can't believe that someone as strong as the player, someone valuable, would want to waste time on Lily, someone worthless. What can you do, Lily? You failed to convince me to listen to you. You don't even have the strength of a trainer. Lily internalizes her mother's logic. On Ula Ula, Lily meets Hapu and the two trek to Tapu Bulu's temple on the island. After reaching another Tapu on Pony, Lily thanks Hapu for her assistance. That's what friends do, Hapu says. Friends? An amazing trainer like Hapu considers me a friend. The idea is almost inconceivable for Lily, that an amazing trainer would bother to make her acquaintance. Likewise, Hapu's appraisal is meaningful to Lily because she is such an amazing trainer. Sun and Moon strongly imply that Lusamine believes her daughter to be worthless because she venerates the traditional structure of trainer-Pokemon relations as relayed to us, the player, through gameplay. Sun and Moon understand Lusamine as a kind of Pokemon trainer herself. Upon entering Aether Paradise for the first time, Wick lays out the game's central metaphor. I suppose all children must yearn to take a journey of their own choosing when they get to be about your age, though you're hardly just children anymore. Trainers are like parents to their Pokemon. If Wick's assertion is true, then isn't Lusamine suggesting she wants to be a mother to all of those poor Pokemon, not a euphemistic way of saying she wants to catch them all as a trainer ought to want to? Lusamine spends the entire game obsessed with protecting the Ultra Beast Nihilego, a mysterious Pokemon only whispered about in legends. She must have Nihilego added to her collection, with a zeal one might expect of a player attempting to capture a newly announced legendary. And how does Lusamine expect her Pokemon to behave after they are given her protection? Trust me, children would all be much happier if they'd only listen to the adults around them. She expects her Pokémon to listen to her, to accept her love. After all, would you continue to use a Pokémon that habitually failed to listen to you? Would you go into a contest if your Pokémon refused to wear what you wanted them to? Any trainer worth their salt wouldn't. They'd lose everything they're in if they did. So any Pokémon that does not comply with Lucamine's demands are bad Pokémon, and would be better off discarded. According to Wick's metaphor, Lily and Gladion are Lucamine's Pokémon. Thus, they are subject to the rules I've just discussed. Lucamine should have full control over what her children do, how they act, and even what they look like. It's not surprising that Sun and Moon would make it a point to emphasize clothing as a form of autonomy. The games frequently show Lily looking wistfully at apparel shops across Alola. In Hau'oli, Lily asks if we pick out all our own clothes, saying she doesn't know her own style. Lucamine modeled her after the image of the Pokémon she most desires, so her daughter would match the decorum of the other furniture. Lily may be physically distant from her mother, but as long as she continues to wear those clothes, her psyche is still trapped within her mother's clutches. Meanwhile, Lucamine's other child uses clothing to express the inverse. Gladion, finding his mother's behavior unacceptable, rebels in typical teenage fashion by doing the opposite of whatever his mom likes. If the Aether Foundation is characterized by bright whites, he will dress in dark blacks. He will run away, forcing his independence before he's entirely ready to face the outside world by his lonesome. Sun and Moon aren't done with Lucamine just yet. Consider how the games talk about another one of a trainer's all-important tools, PC boxes. What happens to a Pokemon's consciousness when it's been put into a PC box? To be conscious, you must be awake and aware of the world around you, wouldn't you say? But are Pokemon awake when they're in a PC box, or are they sleeping? Imagine using the same Pokemon in your boxes in battle again after hundreds of years. It's like a kind of time machine, isn't it? Sun and Moon seem to understand placing Pokemon inside a box as a disruption in continuity and time, even a cessation of cognition. To place a Pokemon in a box and then retrieve it after a decade, it would be as if you had awoken that Pokemon from a 10-year nap, not unlike a form of cryostasis. Incidentally, this is why the rebuttal of Pokemon go to Poképelago when placed in a box does not work. This is categorically not how the games view the normal procedure of placing a Pokemon inside a box. And even though it is offered as a potential solution, we'll see later that this is also not an unassailable answer to the dilemma the games are raising. Simply put, Sun and Moon do not think this is a good way to treat Pokemon. Entering Lucamine's house, homely is about the least appropriate word to describe what we find. The foyer is blanketed in a sterile white. Giant iron bars barricading the doors and stairs. And down into the house's basement, we find a set of containers filled with frozen Pokemon, what Lucamine dubs her private collection. You know, Lucamine's PC? It can't get much more overt than that. Elsewhere in Aether Paradise, the Tygnolls are cryogenically frozen after experimentation on them goes awry. This is not humane. It is simply a way to clean up the mess after the Pokemon prove useless. The foyer reveals Lucamine's PC for what it really is. This is not a home for these Pokemon, it is a prison. And if Pokemon are children, this house is Lily's cage too. Lily's bag, if you will. A bag Lucamine desperately wants her daughter to stay inside. A pall hangs over the Aether Foundation in Sun and Moon. Lucamine believes there is beauty in conservation. This is why she tries to appear ageless, as Hao points out. The Pokemon she has frozen in her PC are the same ones mentioned in a storybook as going on the Island Challenge. Tradition, like the Island Challenge, must be respected and it must be preserved. But Sun and Moon aren't so sure. Wick states that nature does have its own balance, of course. It can be difficult to judge just how much we humans should try to affect that, can't it? What are the things worth intentionally protecting, and what are worth letting fade away? Not everyone is like Hal. Does the traditional Pokemon formula work for everyone? Team Skull is the most obvious way in which Sun and Moon work through this anxiety. Broadly, Team Skull feels that because they did not succeed in the Island Challenge, they do not have a path in life, no people to connect to, and no one to belong with. A life in isolation. We've got all these moldy old traditions in Alola, the kahunas, the captains. It's time we cut out all that silly garbage and make something new for ourselves. Trust me, I get that. Team Skull is Sun and Moon's suggestion that rigid adherence to tradition may be more alienating than unifying. While the Aether Foundation and Lusamine represent the institution of catching within the Pokémon universe, Team Skull and Guzma represent the institution of battling. He is all about raw physical power. The more of it, the better. Guzma's language is evidence enough for this distinction. Far from conservation and love, he speaks of destruction and is enamored with beatings and rage. He postures as the toughest trainer around. He has to be known as the best. One Team Skull member reveals that Guzma was denied a Z-ring, and thus any Z-crystals due to his sheer strength. Except that is no compliment. These objects are important symbols within Alola, symbols of acceptance by the Tapus, and by being denied them, it is an implicit message from the Tapus and Kahunas that Guzma does not belong. See, Guzma, he really likes the president. She's the only adult who ever seemed to see how strong he was. While the rest of Alola spurned him, Lusamine saw something else. To have strength is to have value. Despite their differences, this is the point Lusamine and Guzma agree on. Sun and Moon suggest Guzma's posturing is a cover for insecurity. In Po Town, he reveals how he really views himself in a speech filled with double entendre. He speaks as a physically abusive father would to his son. You're one messed up kid. You want to know what I do when some machine messes up? The first thing I do is give it a nice hard smack. I mean, most of the time I smash it to pieces, but hey, what can you do? Now let's see if I can't fix you. Guzma failed to become an Island Challenge champion, and felt useless as a result. In a region that places such a high value on traditions like the Island Challenge, to fail at it represents a fundamental flaw in one's character. It is telling that whenever Guzma loses, he yells at himself. What is wrong with you? Guzma is a broken machine because he did not fit within tradition. Becoming the strongest is the only way to repair himself. It's worth stopping for a moment. It's hard to deny what's happened here. With Lusamine and Guzma, Sun and Moon have just meted out what can only be described as one of the most devastating takedowns of its own premise imaginable. Sun and Moon are so openly hostile to its own excesses, directly comparing the core tenets of the franchise, catching and battling, to forms of domestic abuse. Pokémon tucked up in their Pokeballs, Team Skull locked up in their little town. I wonder if either enjoys the experience, Nanu pontificates. But remember our central metaphor. Trainers are like parents, right? So we've gotten to know what a bad parent looks like. What about a good one? It's not enough for Sun and Moon to simply wag its finger. It's time for Sun and Moon to set a good example. Can there be another way for Pokémon? That good example begins to emerge around the end of Acerola's trial. It's at this point in the game where the Island Challenge becomes almost ancillary. That in and of itself is not unusual. There have always been moments in previous Pokémon games where the gym trials take a pause for an evil team interruption. But the weird thing about Sun and Moon is, after Acerola's trial, it never really comes back. Nanu's fight is hastily squeezed in between Po Town and the infiltration of Aether Paradise. Mina does not care in the slightest to come up with a trial, despite being a captain. Pony Island's Kahuna battle takes place before the 7th and final trial, and that trial is a much leaner affair pushed into the middle of a location we were already going to for a completely different reason. The established structure of a Pokémon game has fallen apart. I thought the Island Challenge was the primary motivator of our journey. If that's basically gone, what are we even doing here? This is again where Sun and Moon do something unprecedented. The games shift the weight of the narrative almost entirely onto Lily, and the story finally starts to pay off its carefully planted seeds. Lily confronts her mother, and though she fails to stop her from harming Nebby, the attempt was not meaningless. Lily comes out of the interaction with a new resolve, changing outfits and, as a result, taking the first step towards her independence. With the status quo altered, Lily speaks of having a new objective. To save Nevi, yes, of course, but her real mission is to see her mother one more time, to tell her that she can't control her anymore, to tell her mother no. I'm not sure I have the words. This is some incredible stuff right here. It is, without a doubt, the most intriguing and introspective motivation a character in a Pokemon game has ever had. This is like a real thing this character is concerned about, not gym badges or crystal energy or end-of-the-world villain takeovers, but a daughter's perceived duty to her mother. That's what's motivating the final act of these games, explicitly. What follows from this revelation are a collection of the best cutscenes in Pokemon history. On Executor Island, Lily and the trainer take a little journey. Some Alolan Executor ambush us, yet another instance of Sun and Moon crafting specific situations to show off its new Pokemon. And while initially scared, Lily soon realizes she's having fun. Here, the games reposition our understanding of what a trainer is, and how Lusamine fits into that model. For Lily, a trainer was someone who controlled, collected, and hurt their children. But seeing us, she now realizes that this isn't what a trainer, at least not a good one, looks like. A good trainer treats her children well, encourages them, facilitates their growth. This is what Lily must tell her mother. She must tell her mother what being a good trainer really is. Lily's anecdote about her childhood perfectly demonstrates the point. Lily wanted to dance in the rain. Instead of stopping her, Lusamine decided to join in and dance with her, despite the high likelihood of them both getting sick. This is what a good trainer does. They don't shield their Pokemon from any and all risk. They encourage them to experience new things. They take part in it. They offer refuge and a warm bed when things end poorly. And in the end, the Pokemon comes out stronger for having had the experience. We just saw this happen to Lily with the Alolan Executor. But then, at some point, Lusamine became a bad trainer. Those she was charged with protecting became tools for use, objects to bruise and beat and collect. This leads us to our final confrontation, where Lily once again opposes her mother in Ultra Space, and the two lay bare the game's arguments. This scene is electric. It hits all the beats perfectly. Never have I wanted to stand up and cheer for a character in a Pokemon game, but here we are. Children are not just things that belong to their parents. Pokemon are not just things that a trainer can do whatever they want to. I am alive. Cosmog is alive. We are not things for you to collect. Lily rejects the impulse to collect, the implicit motivation that animates so much of this series. Unsurprisingly, Lusamine responds by defending this impulse. How am I different from any Pokemon trainer, like your little friend there? What do you do with a Pokemon you can't use? You remove it from your party as you please. Is this not what Pokemon has consistently asked us to do over the past 30 years? Throw Pokemon we don't care about anymore into our PC box and forget they ever existed? Is this not the way of the trainer? We know the answer. Nihilego's poisons do not control, they amplify. Lusamine's conservation efforts taken to their extreme become an insatiable desire to freeze time and preserve. Valuing strength to protect becomes a desire to beat and dominate. Nihilego offers the toxicity of a trainer who only values themselves over their children. After a battle, Lily and Nevi fittingly strike the final blow against Lusamine, freeing her from Nihilego. With its toxic influence receding, Lusamine sees a different kind of beauty, the beauty of her daughter's independence. The kind of independence any trainer should want from their Pokemon. It is hard to overstate how beneficial this metaphor of trainer and parent is for the series. It allows Pokemon to interrogate what a trainer is with some clarity beyond a smattering of saccharine cliches about growth and strength. It does what so many other Pokemon games have failed to do and gives us a legitimately convincing reason for why becoming a trainer might be a worthwhile thing. What Lily stands to gain by becoming a trainer is not a trophy room or fame and glory, but freedom. the ability to live her own life as she sees fit, to make connections with people across the globe, and maybe even the courage to select her own clothes. The values of a good trainer tell Lily she doesn't have to remain in her mother's bag. If it wasn't clear already, the space from Po Town through Pony Island is my favorite thing that's ever happened in a Pokemon game. It's this series punching well above its weight and actually landing on target, which is what I'd like to end the video off on, but I just can't. As much as I'm tempted to call Sun and Moon the perfect Pokemon story, there's just this one piece that really grinds my gears. A choice where Sun and Moon retreat back to their comfortable little alcove and re-establish the importance of everything they spent their entire runtime criticizing. It's the Lily scene right after exiting Ultra Space. I have two problems with what goes on here, although I suppose you could say the first is more of a preference than a problem. Let's consider the broader context of this scene. At the Hau'oli docks, Lily commits herself to going to Kanto to become a full-fledged trainer. I do not think Lily becoming a trainer is a compelling choice for her character, while fully admitting that Sun and Moon do properly set this decision up across the story. I will also acknowledge that Sun and Moon give a pretty compelling argument as to why she would choose to do this, referring back to what I discussed in the last section. The thing is, I think there's a much more clever answer to the issue of Lily's future, and the games are so close to getting it. But to get at what that answer is, we need to step even further back. In the middle of our hike through the vast Pony Canyon, Lily and the player come across a bridge similar to that of the plank bridge at Mahalo Trail. Adding to Sun and Moon's repertoire of excellent cutscenes, what the games do with this pile of planks is so simple yet so interesting. Lily was too scared to cross the bridge at Mahalo, but this time she has a new tool in her arsenal, her Z-Power form. So, to not suffer the same fate at Vast Pony Canyon, she activates her Z-move, giving her the strength to cross the bridge even when a group of Murkrow attack from above. And how does she contextualize this achievement? She likens the crossing of the bridge as completing a trial in the Island Challenge. This bridge scene is a really playful thing for a Pokemon game. It's making explicit Lily's journey across Alola as a metaphor for a trainer's journey. Vast Pony Canyon, in the context of Sun and Moon, acts as the game's Victory Road equivalent, a relatively complicated dungeon filled with trainers right before the game's final bosses. Similarly, this trial is Lily's Victory Road, a penultimate test to prove that she's ready to take on the champion battle. The champion battle, in this case, being her confronting her mother in Ultra Space. But it's not just this bridge that's important. What is the Island Challenge supposed to do? It's supposed to enrich your understanding of yourself by visiting all of Alola, meeting new people, and learning new perspectives. Over the course of Sun and Moon, Lily visits every island, visits the Tapus, completes trials, gains a Z-Power, meets the Kahunas, and faces a grand trial at the end. And as a result, she has evolved into a new person, ready to venture out into the world. By all intents and purposes, it seems like Lily has completed an island challenge in every sense of the word. In creating this metaphor, Sun and Moon is offering a counterpoint to a perspective like Guzma's. Lily did not take on the Island Challenge, she is not a trainer, nor was she given a Z-Crystal. But she is not alienated from Alola. It's exactly the opposite. Lily is culturally engaged, by taking the spirit of the Island Challenge and making it work for her unique circumstances. We see other examples of this as well. Hapu was not chosen to be a kahuna by Tapu Lele, so she went on her own sort of Island Challenge to become worthy, but not the Island Challenge. Sun and Moon are suggesting that there's more than one path to self-actualization, and that the Island Challenge that defines Alola is not as rigid as become a Pokemon trainer, clear all 7 trials, and best all the island kahunas. Think back to Mahalo Trail. Lily points out that the player was able to save Nebby even though we were not yet a trainer. These are the games explicitly decoupling being a trainer from being capable. Lily does not need to be a trainer to show bravery. This is a surprisingly poignant argument for Sun and Moon to make, but I think it's clear now why Lily choosing to become a trainer undermines this argument. It's redundant. Lily has already completed her Island Challenge, already self-actualized and shown bravery. Now she has to do it all over again? The choice implies that Lily's journey was lesser than ours, that because she didn't take on the literal island challenge, her journey is incomplete, her bravery insufficient. Now, she needs to catch up with us, instead of being on equal footing. Becoming a trainer is not the only way, but it is the best way to connect with the world of Pokémon. The bottom line is this. It is frustrating that in a game about how Lily does not need to conform to the will of her mother and that she should seek to become her own person, becoming her own person just so happens to mean conforming to the norms and expectations of the Pokémon universe that have been upheld across 6 previous generations of the franchise. That's a weaker answer to the argument than the one they could be giving. Lily could choose to be anything else. A painter, an historian, a journalist, a doctor, a dentist, a Pokémon dentist. Alternatively, Lily could say she still isn't sure what she wants to do with her life. All of these answers would be stronger and more resonant than the one they chose to go with. There is nothing incompatible at all with Lily thinking of us as a role model and her deciding not to become a trainer. Her choice feels like an inevitability solely because of the kind of game she's in and not because of the character herself. Lily repeatedly makes clear she does not like battling because she can't stand when Pokémon get hurt. I guess that was just a sign of her early game cowardice and she needs to get over it? That's pretty rich coming from Sun and Moon, considering they make a fairly persuasive argument as to why Pokémon getting hurt is a legitimate concern when it comes to being a trainer. But okay. Like I said, Sun and Moon do at least lay out their logic as to why Lily wants to become a trainer, and explain why trainers aren't all secret Lucamines in disguise, so I'll be a little forgiving on this point. I'm going to be far less forgiving towards my other problem with this ending Lily scene, that being a one gas cloud turned lion and/or bat. Straight up, Nebby should not be joining our team. Let me explain. Consider this completely hypothetical scenario. I, the player, battle Solgaleo and catch it. I brainstorm for an appropriately menacing nickname to give my new legendary, until at last inspiration strikes. I name it Fartface. Now, me being a high-status sort of trainer, I can't be seen whipping out legendary Pokémon every other battle. That'd just be crass. I battle with homegrown, made-from-scratch, legitimate Pokémon, not this OP story hand-me-down riffraff. So, after a test drive with Fartface, I've had enough. Fartface is to go inside my PC box immediately, where it can begin fulfilling its position as my Poképelago Senior Regional Bean Harvester for the rest of its very long life. So, what's the problem with this completely hypothetical situation I've concocted? Well, to answer that, we need to acknowledge something else. Up to this point, I've mostly stuck to talking about Lily as a revolutionary character for Pokémon. But the truth is, there's a second revolution happening right next to her, Nebby. See, in Pokémon games, Pokémon are not characters. They're symbols, metaphors, representations of things the games are interested in. Look into any Pokémon and what you'll find is a pointer to an ecological issue or an examination of the inner psyche of its trainer. Nebby isn't devoid of this, but it's also clearly more. Nebby is a character. We know things about Nebby's personality, its desires, things unique to Nebby. We know Nebby is rambunctious, mischievous. We know it absolutely does not want to stay inside the bag. Lily and Nebby occupy similar positions within the narrative. Just as Lily was a terrible trainer for not getting Nebby into her bag, maybe Nebby is a naughty Pokémon for not wanting to get in there in the first place. There's a sense in which each character wants to defy the roles cast for them. The entirety of Sun and Moon ask us to consider Nebby as a valuable person, an agent worthy of moral consideration. Indeed, this fact is what informs the inciting incident of the games. Lily needs to leave Aether Paradise to protect Nebby. Furthermore, Nebby's lack of autonomy is what propels us into the game's final act, when it's thrown into Lucamine's cage and tortured. Yet the nanosecond Nebby becomes a sprite on our touchscreen, that moral consideration evaporates. I can do whatever I want with it, and when I'm done, toss it aside into its gilded cage to be forgotten for eternity, another addition to my ever-expanding private collection. It defies everything we know about the character. Nebby would never want to spend eternity in Poképelago, yet I can boot up my copy of Sun that I haven't played for 9 years, open up my PC box, and there Nebby sits, like the good little Pokemon it is. The game has absolutely no opinion on the matter, and that is because the moment it is added to my Pokédex, Nebby ceases to be a character worth considering. It instead becomes an extension of my will, a tool, just like every other Pokemon. So we see that the problem isn't merely that Fartface feels like a disrespectful name for me to give this character, the problem is the event itself. Any name would be equally as bad. What right do I have to rename Nebby? Nebby, you belong with the player now. He will be the one to raise you, just like any parent should raise their child. He will be your father now. It's just nonsensical. In games which have repeatedly told us that Nebby does not want to get into the bag, remembering that Lily's bag is a symbol for a Pokeball, something which she reminds us of in the very scene we're discussing, what reason should I now believe that Nebby wants to get into my Pokeball? In games which have repeatedly told us that parents should eventually give their Pokemon the gift of independence, how does it make sense to give Nebby a new parent to hover over it? I know this is what Nebby wants. Oh well, in that case. Thanks, Sun and Moon. Now I'm super convinced. But alright, fine, let's assume that Lily's assessment on Nebby's needs are correct, and that Nebby does want to travel the world battling like every other Pokemon. But also would be completely fine if it didn't do that and I left it in Poképelago instead. I'm afraid that still doesn't get us to a point where it makes sense for Nebby to join us. You can go to so many places and meet so many Pokemon and people, and they will enrich your life. But not with me. I'm not a trainer, Nebby. I can't take you on the adventures you want. I can't give you the fierce battles you want. What is going on here? Remember that Lily has already endeavored to become a trainer as strong as us. I made a whole fuss out of it just a few minutes ago. But that's what's so confusing about this justification. Lily is attempting to become exactly the sort of person she claims Nebby wants to travel with. So then if Nebby were to stay with Lily, wouldn't it be getting precisely what it wants? Unfortunately, we have to default back to Pokemon's fundamental assumptions about trainers and Pokemon to answer this question. It's the explanation we came up with when describing why Lily couldn't get Nebby into her bag, or make it do any moves. A Pokemon does not listen to a trainer's commands if the trainer is not experienced enough. Lily can't be with Nebby because she's not good enough for Nebby yet. There's something depressing about this explanation though, isn't there? That this is the overriding way in which we should analyze these two characters? Lily and Nebby can't enjoy each other's company in other ways? That the bond between people and Pokemon cannot go anywhere else, cannot be anything else other than a complementary pair of trainer and battler. And if Lily isn't strong enough, isn't valuable enough, she simply isn't worth Nebby's time. That Nebby's time would be better spent with us, because we are the strong trainer. In this way, the games suggest Lily's ability as a trainer is what dictates her value as a person and who should hang out with her. But that was Guzma's perspective. That was Lusamine's perspective, which is why this choice is so infuriating. It would be one thing for Lily to let Nebby go and be free and have its own independence. That's perfectly in line with the game's themes. But by having Nebby also choose to join us instead, something the games can only justify with, essentially, because I said so, Sun and Moon are implicitly aligning themselves with Lusamine's perspective on her daughter. It's also why I rail against things like Lily becoming a trainer. It's another way in which the games imply Lily is not different, but somehow less than the player character. It's a disappointingly short-sighted choice for games which are otherwise really thoughtful about this stuff. Of course, I'm sure most of you have realized that this entire exercise of mine has been pointless. Sure, I've had to tie myself into a pretzel to make sense of the game's decision here, but we know the real reason this is happening, right? It's because the games are working backwards at this moment. This is all for the player's benefit. I know the gravity of what I'm asking here. For the games to truly give Nebby the autonomy the story suggests it deserves, the games would have to deny us our box legendary. Not for now, but forever. I'm asking Sun and Moon to never let us catch Nebby, for the series to tell us that there is something more important than reaffirming the player character's importance. Is what I'm asking for really so radical? These are the games that gave us characters like Lily and Nebby after all. It's not like I'm asking Sun and Moon to create a permanent hole in our Pokédex either, although I would not be opposed to that in any way. There could simply be other Solgaleo or Lunala to catch that are not Nebby. But I think at the heart of this issue is that Sun and Moon are still not reckoning with their own conclusions. The games differentiate between good trainers and bad ones, and correctly call out that the structures in-game incentivize us to act like bad trainers. But the games are not quite so willing to actually change the incentive structures themselves, to try and direct us towards being good trainers. That would require restrictions, impediments on our all-powerful reach. It would require not being allowed to stick Fartface in a PC box for a decade without consequence. Or, just casually catching the Tapus, very culturally significant icons within Alola's history, for my own personal use. I mean, that's obviously unacceptable. It would basically destroy the island challenge as we know it. Again, it's frustrating that Sun and Moon convincingly argue that this is toxic behavior, but then just let us engage in that toxic behavior anyway. When the games ask us to sacrifice nothing of ourselves to get to know Alolan culture, to make no concessions, it doesn't feel like getting to know the peoples and places of Alola is really Sun and Moon's foremost concern. Have you noticed a certain symmetry between the two problems I've outlined? Both Lily and Nebby are stories about characters seeking to escape the bags their trainers want them forced into. Both stories give these characters the attention they deserve, empowering them to make their own decisions. And then, when it finally comes time to make said decisions, both characters choose to re-enter the bags they've just escaped from. Lily wants to become strong by battling with Pokémon. Nebby wants to become the pliant Pokémon that obeys commands in battle. It is technically their choice, but I also happen to think there's a whole universe of interesting possibilities waiting right outside those bags. To their credit, Sun and Moon come precariously close to exploring those possibilities. There's something almost vestigial about the Pokémon League in Sun and Moon. Victory Road is barren and empty, and while the League plays out about how you'd expect, the second we finish it, we're right back to some more conversations with Lily. Not that that's a complaint. I'm all for more conversations with Lily. I do wonder, however, if this isn't another area in which Sun and Moon could have chosen to be a little more adventurous in its thinking. Does Pokémon actually need a league for it to be a proper Pokémon game? The series might even agree with me. Generation 7 is, at the point of writing, the last time a Pokémon League would be played so straightforward. Generation 8 would reinterpret the League as a sporting tournament, and Generation 9 would heavily de-emphasize its importance by placing it as the climax to one of 3 spokes in Scarlet and Violet's main story. Kukui's plan for Alola is to bridge that final gap between the Island Challenge and the gyms, to build a league which will allow Alolan trainers to be recognized on a world stage. This is framed as an unambiguously positive step forward, but it seems like more interrogation on the subject is required. By exporting the Island Challenge to a global community, wouldn't this add more pressure on the kids who choose to participate? By entrenching Alola further into the institution of battling, couldn't the building of a league exacerbate the same stressors and alienation that created something like Team Skull? Kukui cites Kanto as his primary inspiration for Alola's league. There's something disheartening in the idea that Generation 7 feels it must appeal to the first generation to retain public legitimacy. What if there was a league in Alola, but it was different, structured differently, required us to do different challenges? A league that better resembled Alola and Alola alone. Sun and Moon are wrong. Lily, Alola, Pokémon do not need Kanto to be real Pokémon. We all have our pipe dreams for Pokémon. For some, that dream was to be able to explore an open world with their Pokémon. For others, it's a visually appealing game with stable performance. But for me, it's always been about the story. Why don't we have a Pokémon game with something as gripping and directed as many of its RPG peers? Something like a Dragon Quest XI, but for Pokémon. or at the very least, something that would push the series towards a new ideological paradigm which doesn't involve gyms, trials, leagues, or frankly, competition as the central focus. Sun and Moon don't go quite as far as I'd like, ultimately retreating to familiar ground at the last second. And yet, I must admit that they do manage to make a strong case for the traditional formula's value to Pokémon. Kukui is the series' most present professor, tagging alongside you for nearly the whole first 2/3 of the game. His presence isn't unwelcome though. Kukui's attitude towards catching and battling is infectious. When he speaks about using the League to give trainers a chance to connect with their Pokémon, it's hard not to buy into his enthusiasm, at least a little. There's a temptation to claim that Sun and Moon have the best story in a Pokémon game because they cover a dark, mature topic like domestic abuse. Finally, Pokémon is starting to become adult now that it's reveling in misery. But this is completely wrong. Sun and Moon have the best story because they treat that topic with the respect and empathy it deserves. The games redefine the importance of being a trainer. Rather than competition and extended affirmation of our own greatness, the games give us something more concrete, something undeniable. Whenever I feel like there's nothing I can do, you seem to show up and you do something. Every time, you've shown me that it's possible to do something. Sun and Moon use our prowess as a Pokémon trainer to uplift a person in need, to tell her that she is not powerless to stop her abuse. That, however weak she perceives herself to be, she has the capacity to do something right now. In the face of that, who honestly cares about becoming champion?